Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You will hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Rural schools rise or fall on the strength of their leaders. And today I'm joined by Casey DeFord of Teach for America, a national leader focused on building that bench, especially in the places where distance, thin staffing, and tight budgets are everyday realities. Casey helps design and lead the Rural School Leadership Academy, which is a year-long experience that grows educators into principals and systems-level change makers with practical coaching, community, and real work back in their home districts. In this conversation, we're going to unpack how the Academy actually works, who it serves, how fellows learn, and what changes in their practice by the end of the year. We'll talk about what keeps rural leaders rooted in their communities, how policy fluency and partnerships strengthen school boards and coalitions, and really what respectful leadership development looks like in Native serving regions. We're also going to dig into site visits that transfer, not just copy good practice, and how Casey measures impact without adding burden, and what's next for the Academy so that more small systems can tap into it. So if you care about durable pipelines and real-world leadership growth and expanding opportunity without losing the soul of rural schools, this is your episode. So let's get to it. Casey, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm incredibly excited to be here as a fan of the podcast.
Oh, I love that. So then you know how things happen around here. So let's just dive into it because I'm going to ask you to give us your through line. You've been a core member from the Greater Delta Corps in Blytheville. You've been a principal, you've done district improvement work, and now you're doing some national leadership at Teach for America. So talk to us a little bit about that through line and really what was that pivotal moment that clarified that where you are now is where you need to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question. So I think you gave, my background roadmap really well. And it was in my role in the Blytheville School District where I was working with the school leadership team, the superintendent, the State Department of Education in Arkansas, and our local school board, where I realized we throw a lot at leaders and we oftentimes don't ask them what they need to be successful. So a simple question of what do you need became a big cornerstone of the work that I decided I really wanted to put my stakes in. I had an opportunity in 2019 to move to Nashville, Tennessee with Teach for America, where I was going to get to work with incoming Corps members, which was different than my work that I was doing with district leaders. But COVID-19 happened, and I had an opportunity to ask myself in that moment of where do you want to be and what work do you want to do? And I realized I really wanted to continue the work with school leaders. So worked in Metro Nashville with Teach for America on some of our aspiring school leader pipelines and loved the work, but really missed rural education. I noticed that there was a ton available to urban-centered educators who need support and need professional development like any educators, but there was this pull to me of, you've got to go back to rural. It's what you're passionate about. It's what you love. It's how you grew up in school leadership. And there was an opportunity to support the Teach for America Idaho team with a Teach for America national team that worked on career acceleration and advancement. And I got to also work on the Rural School Leadership Academy team, which was at that time in its 11th year. It's in its 13th year now. And it led me to believe when we ask leaders what they need, they oftentimes know the answers. When we ask them how they want to best support their teachers and their community, they know. So I have an incredible job, which is asking people what they need, getting curious about what exists out there, and then helping connect the dots for folks that have all of the gusto and heart and passion in the world, but time is a valuable thing. So if we can create conditions where things are being presented to them and they're being heard and elevated, I feel like it's a dream job.
Yeah, that's well said. Before we dive into the Academy, Casey, I want to ask, What are the lessons that you're taking from those early years of education that really still anchor your leadership decisions today?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I did the core as a Teach for America core member, I was placed in a charter school, and charter schools in rural areas aren't as common as they are in urban settings. But I was with a national network called KIPP, and I felt like I was thrown in to receive some of the best content, knowledge, and training. But I wasn't really equipped to, I think, be a great teacher or learn how to map community assets. And I did a lot of that learning myself, and I threw myself entirely in my community. I realized that parents and advocates in the community were going to be real levers to me being successful. And as a result, I think I moved up the leadership pipeline really quickly. In fact, I think I moved up too quickly. I think that you don't really become a great teacher until you've taught for at least 3 to 5 years. And I was a teacher, and then a grade level chair, then an AP, founded a school, then was in a district role, and burnout felt really real. And thinking back, what sustained me were these lifelines, folks that were teaching at other KIPP schools or that I met at professional developments that I would call when I needed to vent or crowdsource or just basically say, like, what's keeping me in this work? And I think that is so important to me to always think through when a school leader feels overwhelmed or is, not maybe completing things that need to be completed, stepping back and asking what's the cause of it. And I think had I done RSLA as a core member that was in a rural community, what would my trajectory have been? Would I still be in schools? Would I be supporting school leaders more locally versus like nationwide? And I don't know the answer to that, but I do think it really pushes my charge of asking folks what they need and then connecting them to things and pushing them to take advantage of things that will really help them.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate those learnings. Let's jump into RSLA. So that's the Rural School Leadership Academy.
Yes.
Can you give us the background on who it serves and how it works?
Yeah.
And what you're trying to grow over the fellowship year that your candidates are with you?
Yes, absolutely. So RSLA is in its 13th year of existence. It started 13 years ago as a year-long cohort-based experience to support Teach for America alumni who were in rural communities that had stayed past their 2-year teaching commitment and wanted longevity in place. Several years ago, though, we realized, why have this as just an alumni-only program when there's incredible school leaders that we've met through our core member placement programs that are, anytime an opportunity comes to their door, they're taking advantage of it. There's a real opportunity to support all rural school leaders who are interested in this year-long career accelerator, retention-based, place-based program. And we've typically had around 30 to 35 members of each cohort, but this past year, we actually expanded. We have 71 rural leaders across 22 U.S. states and sovereign nations. And a mix of folks that did the core themselves and have stayed local, and a mix of school leaders that are in the same district that they actually grew up and went to school in. And it's a beautiful thing because we have participants from Hawaii and Idaho. We have Georgia on the map for the first time. And we're actually in a growth year where we want to hit all 50 states. And what that means is kind of changing the way we've done the program, but keeping the cornerstones the same, which are, we want folks to experience leadership growth. We have them assess themselves when they join the cohort of how well do you do at making decisions, delegating, conflict resolution, what are soft and hard leadership skills, but where do you fall and how do you want to grow? And then we coach them and we talk to them, and then they rate themselves after, and at least 80% of them experience significant growth in those metrics. We also want to see role advancement. And that doesn't mean that everyone that comes in our program the next year is getting a promotion or stepping into a seat that may not actually exist for them. Just as we know how rural schools function and grow, there's not AP seats always. But we have 3 tracks. And the first track is for aspiring leaders. So they've taught for at least 3 years. there may be a grade level chair, an instruction department lead, but they love the adult facing side of the teaching and learning. And they're those unofficial coaches. The second track is assistant principals who have completed their principal cert program, are like the runner up to be the next principal once the principals may be retiring in 3 to 5 years, and is really taking a lot of those extra opportunities that exist. So maybe they're the Title I coordinator along with being the AP, all of the things, the many hats that role leaders wear.
Yep.
And then we have a third track, which is for small district superintendents and principals. Next year, we're going to have 4 because we noticed the district role is different than the principal role. And we want to just be sure we're creating the learning to exist between the two. And then role retention. We want our folks to stay. And we've had the program for 13 years. There's been over 300 people that have gone through it. And at least 85% of them have remained in role education post 2 years from the program. And then we want to engage our alumni. We don't want to just be like, you did this for a year, go forth. It's, you did this for a year. Are you still connecting with folks in your cohort that you went through problem solving dilemmas for? Are you leaning on those resources that actually really helped you when they were really present in front of mind? And we want to visit their schools. So a huge element of the program is virtual learning, but twice a year, we find a rural school that's gone through some change management. So we've gone to Lindsay Unified School District a couple times, which was a story of a rural district that knew that it could capitalize on the community more. It could do more than it was currently doing for students. And they threw their hat at grants and Marzano and all of these things, and are just now this case study of rural education is excellent. 1 in 5 students go to a rural school, and rural school leaders think through problems in such savvy ways, but they oftentimes don't have a network of folks to talk about those solutions with, or the hard and the good and the wins. And we want them to see that. So we expose them to, we're going to Henderson Collegiate in Henderson, North Carolina in 2 weeks, which is another example of a school that is shifting the paradigm of education and doing incredible things for students. But the school leaders share their story. This is when I wanted to give up. This is when it was hard. Here's what sustained me. And the gift is that then the 70 educators sitting in that cafeteria listening to that story then throw back to the school leader the incredible things that they saw, which is a very big cup-filling moment, I think, for the communities we visit. So it's just, I say it's a dream. The people I've worked with in the program that started it, that continue to support school leaders, are just, we want educators to feel connected, to feel uplifted, because we know when those things happen, the likelihood of them staying, sharing what's hard and working through the peaks and the valleys that come, they're more likely not going to be leaving, which would mean we'd have to find another principal. There would be teacher vacancies, and how the whole puzzle can go.
Yeah. I want to dive into that a little bit deeper, Casey. So RSLA has supported leaders across a lot of different parts of the country, to your point. Yeah. What would you say are the 2 or 3 design points within the program that really are helping to reliably drive that advancement and retention? And then on the flip side of that, where are you still iterating? Where is the program not landing as intended, and how are you adjusting for that?
Those are great questions. So we've done a bit of shifting in terms of the really defined pillars of learning, but RSLA has 3 core tenets, which is, 1 is a connected cohort. You're going to be in spaces and building community and facilitated community building with folks that are in a totally different rural environment than you, but understand rural education and the struggles, but also the unbelievable assets that being in a rural community has. And you're going to have space with them. You're going to be in consultancy protocols with them. You're going to be in sessions with them in small groups, and in, 2 places probably neither of you have ever been before. And so we believe that by creating a cohort and a cross-state line professional learning community, people will feel like they have someone to share with. and to troubleshoot with even past the year. The second idea is this: be better by Monday. So if we're having folks sit in professional learning, we want to ensure that that learning is really tangible, that they can actually take what they just went through and experience, action plan around that, and then bring that back into their buildings. I know myself, I've gone to these incredible trainings and I leave and I'm like, I have to revamp everything. So we're starting over, and we don't believe that that's an effective way to navigate change. So what can you do on Monday that's going to improve your building? Great. What can you do on Tuesday? And then how can you talk with folks and get support through the coaches we have on our staff and through our incredible facilitator partners to troubleshoot when that's not working? And then visibility, which is an incredibly huge piece that when you talk about where are we sort of shifting and thinking through, rural school leaders have stories to tell. And actually, rural school leaders, by listening to the stories other leaders are telling, can find the solutions to things that feel really unsolvable to them. And when we think of the rural school leader, who at times could be the superintendent and the principal of the high school, or the Title I coordinator and the grant writer, and whoever maybe the math teacher on Monday and Friday, that is a balancing act. And in fact, it's incredible to listen to. How do you get all of those things done? Is it too much? Yes. Are they getting probably not paid enough? Also, yes. But they have innovative solutions. And we want those stories to be told. And we want to build their confidence to tell those stories. Because if we can get them on the national stage, presenting at the NREA, sharing what they're doing on LinkedIn, what we're then doing is pouring into that. People want to hear what you did and they want to celebrate you. But then on the flip side, leaders are hearing those stories and the lessons, and it's supporting them in a really authentic way. Yeah. And so that's that. I hope I answered your question. I may have missed some things, but that's really the thing we're thinking. And then the next piece is we received an incredible grant from the Bezos Foundation, which is allowing us for the next 3 years to grow our program and sustain our program, because it's free of cost to every participant. There is no out-of-pocket expense. So your lodging, your travel, the facilitation, it's free, because we also realize that professional development opportunities are really expensive, and rural schools don't have the same budgets at times that maybe urban districts have. Yeah. And we want to be able to get them the foot into investing in your development and growth is one of the smartest decisions that you can make. And so as a result, we're able to expand. So this 50-state strategy is, are we serving every state in the United States? And are we then, instead of having 100 educators come to one school district, which is logistically not the easiest thing as we found with growth, we're going to have the virtual learning across all state lines. But then the in-person is we're going to cluster our communities into 8 different community clusters, so that folks in New Hampshire and Vermont and maybe Pennsylvania, they're going to be learning together. And the school they visit is going to be more proximate to the type of rural experience that maybe they're having. And so when we think of our Indigenous educators, the Indigenous schools are incredible. And we went to Cowpill Community School several times, which is outside of Albuquerque. And we were able to learn from those leaders. But we need to ensure that that Indigenous experience really values the traditions and the long history of our Indigenous educators. So how powerful would it be if their voices were not left out of conversations, but brought into them with large group learning, but then their community visit that they go to in that school they go to really aligns with their typical day-to-day. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity there. And it's very fun to figure out. And also, finding the schools is another thing, because like I talked about, visibility of the rural school leader is not always as easy to find.
Yeah, absolutely. You've said that the heart of rural schools lies in the leaders. Speaking of leaders who choose to stay, which I love, because you're exactly right. Spot on. How does RSLA help people root in place? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So part of the experience in going to a local community is to have a participant remove themselves from their day-to-day and experience another place where they're not comparing it to like their district because it's not like the next town over, but they're actually getting to see and hear from a school leader who is that we've worked with and we've talked to and kind of coached up to talk about what are the assets in your community that allow you to pour into your teachers and your students. What do you do strategically to bring in families? What do you do strategically to like meet the needs of like your local agriculture or industry? And by hearing those stories and removing yourself from the emotional tie that maybe you have to your own school and community, you get to then see that. And then you get a significant amount of time to step back and reflect, which one of the biggest things we do is really built in reflection time. Because as leaders and as people, we just don't, it feels like wasted time when you have like 900 things to do to say, I'm going to sit for 30 minutes and reflect on something. And we really push the practice of doing that. So when they're in North Carolina, 7 states away, and they've just seen this experience, they then are going to action plan themselves. How am I utilizing the community that loves and cares about the school so much that we're graduates of the school? How are we getting strategic with what local industry is needing or wanting and maybe using that to tie into some of our curriculum? How am I investing in my teachers? Teachers were on the panel and they talked about low-lift things that were done that made a significant change in their day-to-day. And then they're coming to those answers themselves. And when they can't get to an answer, they then have a group of 3 to 4 peers where they're naming their dilemma. This is something I can't figure out. And that group is actually solving it for them to brainstorm some ideas and then holding them accountable to actually implementing things that came out of that practice. The other beautiful thing is the fact that there are track 1, 2, and 3 participants. We sometimes have school teams go. And in fact, we had a school team from Hawaii 2 years ago where there was a teacher leader, an assistant principal, and a principal. And the teacher leader through RSLA found their voice. They found the way, how do I talk to leadership and actually state the change that I want to see and volunteer to own that charge and be really honest with what teachers are experiencing. And all of those 3 leaders going through this process, the foundation that they ended with was really transformational because the teacher leader's influence to teachers is big because they're the person folks are looking to. They typically can control the narrative. The assistant principal was able to really kind of be that middle manager, but with support of how do I influence in the strongest way? And what do I need to do to grow as a leader? And then the principal was able to actually step back and listen to perspective that really would truly shape how he led. And it was just so cool to see.
Wow. That's amazing. And I appreciate that perspective because that's what makes the difference. That really, truly is what makes the difference. Casey, you mentioned Native serving communities. And can you talk a little bit more about what does respectful, strength-based leadership development look like in Native serving regions? And really, how has RSLA adapted based on the feedback that I'm sure you're getting from tribal leaders and Native education departments?
Yeah. So this is a great question. And when we talk about really where we're trying to learn and grow, I would name that this is one of those areas. Like I'm very aware of my identity markers. I didn't grow up in a Native community, but what we've heard from our incredible leaders on the South Dakota team, which is one of Teach for America's placement regions that is run by 2 local leaders, you know, we ask, what are you hearing from participants and as areas of growth for the program? Mm-hmm. One of those things was the contextualization piece where more senior leaders were able to take the experience that they maybe saw in Henderson, North Carolina, and figure out how to relate it back to their lived experience in the schools. But our teacher leaders, that just because I don't think you're exposed to as much reflection and what that translation piece looks like, we're feeling a struggle with that. The other thing is we've typically not had that many Native participants. We've had 3 to 4 in a cohort. And what can happen is, when there's not sort of even grouping, demographic grouping across the board, is people can feel like they're maybe having to be the spokesperson for all of it versus the learner. And so we're really cognizant of that. We want people to go through the process as learners and leading where they feel the need to lead, but not the explainers of why things work the way that they work. So this year, actually, with the Aspen Policy Academy, we one of the things in our contract was a tribal consultant. So we have someone who's working with Aspen when they create the content to really push on that lens. Like, is this encompassing of different types of education? Does this honor the community-based school and the tribal-based school? And ensuring that we have like scaffolding and coaching and meaning making that feels really resonant for our tribal leaders in the program. And then for me, and I think anyone is just continue to learn. So I see folks that are holding some really interesting work. There's a former staff member at Teach for America that runs the LIBOR Institute, which is this incredible program that pours into superintendents and school leaders that are typically Native, and talking to him and what he sees as some of the barriers to Native leaders, but also some of the things that are really impactful and connecting. Because it's not, Teach for America they don't know how to do everything, but they are great connectors. So who out there wants to support rural school leaders, and how can we work with them to get in front of the school leaders, which is a fun job to have.
Yeah. Let's step into that Aspen partnership. Can you talk, Casey, about what the fellows actually gain from that policy partnership, and how does it translate into the curriculum that they're being exposed to and what they're being asked to do when they're back at home?
Absolutely. So one of the things and one of the reasons we partnered with Aspen is there was this opportunity of they're doing incredible work and incredible research for education and rural education. And this has never been done before. So we had a conversation earlier in the year. And one of the things that we noticed that our school leaders were having trouble with is when you have all of these ideas of change that could really positively impact your community and your school, how do you go about creating that change? And we notice that leaders take a lot of it and hold every action step that comes along with it. Or we use language that folks in education can understand, but people outside of education don't always understand what they're saying. And so with Aspen, it's not to create like future politicians. What it is, it's creating a muscle within the leaders of our program to identify a change that they want to see within their building, and a question of how can we blank to make blank happen? And then power mapping. Who are the resources in our community, in our schools that we could get on board to make this change with, or to tap into because maybe they have the answer, and then figuring out the best and most measured way to think through solutions. And so what we're seeing is this, like, people were nervous when they had to rate themselves of how confident do you feel about influencing policy in your building. And people are like, I don't feel confident at all. I'm actually really nervous with this. And they had their first homework assignment, which was to submit their question that they wanted to solve for. And as you know, as a former school leader, people want to be like perfect at the things they do. So they're like, I don't feel equipped to do this. And they're like, this is a learning opportunity. So we have 6 sessions with Aspen. And what we do with their facilitators is they lead them through. Here is actually the 6 steps to creating a policy question. Here's how you map stakeholder engagement. And then here's how you go about solving it. Here's how you research it. Here's how you find schools that have gone through, the same sort of dilemma that you're facing and how they went about it. And it's been a really cool addition and really fun because you're getting folks that haven't always worked really closely with educators, but the format in which they're going about how to impact change is so needed. And when we think through leadership growth, one of the things that you want as a leader is you want to grow and you want to make impact, and learning how to make that impact in a way that brings folks in versus pushes them out is really important.
Yeah, well said. Casey, let's talk about some of that state level learning. You mentioned Idaho. So from your state work, whether it was mentor fellowships or site visits, what have you learned about scaling leadership development in small systems? Because it's different than an urban or suburban place.
Yeah. So in Idaho, I had the incredible opportunity to run a mentor teacher fellowship. So the state of Idaho has an unfunded mandate where any novice teacher, so years 1 to 3, has to have a school-based mentor teacher. And it's something that, we've seen mentor teaching across a lot of states. And it's typically where a veteran teacher will observe your classroom, give you feedback, and support you as a new teacher. And we also know that veteran teachers will give you every lesson plan they've created. They'll stay before school with you. They'll stay after school with you. I remember who I taught across the hall with, and they gave me so much time that I know they didn't even have because they're just nurturing. But what I noticed was those veteran teachers also are the culture holders of the school. So what if we found a way to pour into what I would call like the forgotten teacher, because they're typically doing pretty well. They have like great classroom management. They have great lesson plans. They've been in the building sometimes like 30 plus years. How are we pouring into that? How are we getting them at-bats and opportunities to think through their own development and growth? And we started this idea as any core member we had in Idaho schools in the Treasure Valley would have a mentor teacher that was school-based and come to professional development. And we started with 8 mentor teachers. We actually grew in 3 years to have over 50 mentor teachers because these fundamental things were true. One, we should never assume that veteran teachers don't want growth and opportunity. We have to, again, ask people what they need. We have to meet people where they are with opportunities and mandates and professional learning. Stop giving people so much stuff to do in between the times you're meeting with them and teach them how to think through and use a 15-minute observation cycle to make an immediate change in the novice teacher they're supporting and empower them. But also ask them after they finish mentoring, did you enjoy working with another adult in your building in that capacity? 70% will say, yeah, I loved it. And the rest will say, I absolutely hated it. We push people, or people decide they want to do principal preparation work before they actually know if they want to be a principal, because that's where they see growth. That's where they see financial growth. That's where they see or feel like that's what I'm supposed to do. We have to honor the classroom teacher, and we have to create conditions where they can grow financially, grow in their leadership skills, but not have to shift out of the classroom. Because when veteran teachers feel poured into, they stay. When novice teachers feel supported, they stay. Supported and connected, they stay. And then you have assistant principals, instructional coaches really being able to do things like joint walkthroughs or, all of the things that sometimes you have to put on the back burner because everything feels urgent.
Yeah. Beyond the fellowship year, what scaffolds exist? You mentioned that, there's coaching there, but what else? How else are you building capacity for what's next?
Yeah. So what I do is I figure out kind of through, and it will really come in February, because I think the in-person piece, you just get to have more coffee conversations of where do you see yourself and like, what do you want to do? And in some cases, you'll have a conversation where people are like, I actually am just super burned out. Like, I cannot do this anymore. And with those participants, what I want to figure out is, why did you start in this work in the first place? And through that, it's figuring out what could help sustain them. Do we step back on some of the session work and just add in more like, let's talk it through, connect them with an alum that's gone through the experience? Or figure out like an actual like, is your policy question hitting on what you really need to hit on? Or are you not like confronting in the mirror, like really the changes that need to take place? And then you have some folks that are like, I want to be an assistant principal, but there isn't actually a spot for me right now in my building, which this is a real thing too. I want to grow, And then you're helping them understand that not all leadership has to be officially through a title. So I've seen you with this cohort. You know how to network with everyone. You're incredibly savvy. When you talk about community assets, is there anyone in your building that's connecting the community back to the school currently? Could that be you? Could you name the thing that you're going to do and get approval to do it? And then you've just created leadership opportunity for yourself in a different way while you sort of wait to figure out when that position opens. And then it's connecting them and to continue to connect with them after the experience. So one thing that I'm really excited about is in this upcoming, so cohort 14, which will launch next year, is how are we using alumni of the program to actually lead the work on the ground? And so we have a participant from Hawaii this year and it's because I'm so far from Hawaii and we have so many participants year after year. And I think that the Hawaiian educator experience is much different than some of the more inland state things. And so what he and I do is we work through what is he noticing and seeing? How could he maybe do a community dinner? Or what would it look like for him to really leverage his leadership in this way? And we're going to have more of those. So the goal is to have one for each community cluster, which is really exciting.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. You'll have to keep us posted on that.
Yeah.
So
I think it's going to be exciting.
Casey, talk to me about, and maybe there's more than one, but at least one persistent misconception that you run across about rural leadership that is just very present in the national conversation. And how do you reframe it when you encounter it?
Yeah. So the thing that I notice the most when we talk about rural schools and we talk about rural leaders is an assumption sometimes that rural leader maybe doesn't have the same content level expertise as an urban educator, or because they've been in the building, 50 years, their approach is outdated or they don't want to be there anymore. And I'll notice assumptions are made. And I would tell this actually to my students when I taught, is that there are stereotypes that you face, that maybe you don't see the world through the same lens that other people do because you've never left Blytheville, Arkansas, or people are going to say that your life is going to be in your community doing maybe what your parents did because no one ever leaves and advances. And my question to that is always, what are you going to do when you hear those comments? But my question to the person now that I feel like I have the tact to be able to engage in some of these conversations is, why do you think that? Why do you think that school leader needs to retire? And typically, when you ask the question back, they don't know why they said it. It's because it's how we've talked about rural communities. We've talked about them through a deficit mindset. Well, they don't have as much stuff. We're not going to find a place to host this visit because it's too small or the pace is too slow. I will say that every rural community I go to, I ask the people there, what are you most proud of? And I've never found a place that is so excited to talk about something that brings them so much joy and so much community connection. When I talk about people in more urban areas, what's your favorite thing about why you live here or about what you do? They talk about a specific thing from a smaller community that they're a part of. And so if we're able to actually give leaders the mic to say, it may not look like we have all of the bells and whistles that an urban environment does have, but we have people that will stop on the side of the road if you have a flat tire and put a tire on your car, and you can pay them in 2 weeks, which happened to me as a poor first-year teacher. You'll have people that figure out how to use the car lot of the cars that aren't taken to be the homecoming parade. You'll have an industry, lean in to figure out, what do high school students need? And let's bring them to the steel mill to walk through how much a welder could make directly out of high school if they're not on a path to go to college. The answers are directly in front of us, but we have to get curious as to maybe why isn't that school performing as highly academically? Well, maybe it's because of the way we've talked about the town. They're having a massive teacher shortage. The classrooms don't have teachers. We have to reframe how we're talking about places. And it shouldn't be, well, it's cheaper cost of living. That's great. And that is a perk and an amenity, but that's not something that's going to sustain people. It's the community. It's how your life will be enriched after living in that place. And we have to tell the stories of strengths, but we often tell the stories of deficit, because that's just, as a society, I think oftentimes we focus on what's not working versus what's working.
Yeah. And to that point, can you share a couple of things that you've seen rural leaders do, or local assets that they've used to really expand access for their staff and their students without new money, whether it's transportation or staffing or community partnerships? Can you talk about some of the things that you've seen on your visits?
Yeah. So the stories, I think, are endless. I think one thing that I've seen that was absolutely incredible was a school that was in Idaho. They redefined what an alternative school is. So these were former school leaders that really were they noticed this door into the alternative learning environment wasn't actually alternative learning. It was militant. It was students sitting in a room. It was maybe teachers that were not in the mainstream classrooms anymore. And you know how that dance goes. But what they did is they went around to the community and they said, what's the ideal worker that you're looking for? What's a need that your industry has that they're currently not getting? And they developed an alternative school that allowed students to name what it was that they wanted to be. They wanted to be a teacher or a police officer or an EMT or in culinary and woodworking, all of the things. And they developed this trade school almost that had each student had a mentor in the building. Teachers were told pull up the walls of the classroom and teach content that's really going to get kids reinvested in school. And then the industry would come in and they'd be like, we need things screen printed. Well, a group of students learned how to use a 3D printer and got it printed. And I noticed that instead of the school being the place in the town that everybody knows, that sometimes is associated with negative experiences of being at school, it was redefined. The school is the future of the town. Students were, they're doing catering for events. When we visited, the culinary team led everything. The students led the purchase order, the meal selections, and got to explain what they did. And teachers are supporting that learning because the school leaders have given them permission to let the kids shine. They will come to the answers, but be there to support them every step of the way. And I thought it was just the biggest shift in what people thought alternative learning was. And it was also just a beautiful thing because you saw the school leaders there being like, I haven't talked to anyone in my community and we have incredible industry. I'm setting up that meeting on Monday. I'm going to bring people in. And it was really just a way of everyone in that community is somehow connected to that school. And it was beautiful.
Wow. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
So what's on deck for RSLA over the next year? What do you have on the horizon?
So in 2 weeks, we head to Henderson, North Carolina, where we'll be joined with the Aspen Policy Academy for our second session. And then a group from Leading Educators, who's another one of our partners around instructional coaching through layers, and the school visit. So they'll be in person for the first time and deep in their learning. Then we'll have a couple of virtual sessions, but in March, actually, thanks to the conference, is we are going to Candler County. So Dr. Bronwyn Edwards, who is, Georgia's only state with a Department of Rural Education, helped facilitate a connection with the Meter School District. And so we're going to actually bring educators there to see a different example of a rural Southern school that's district focused. So they're going to do that. And in between, they'll be making connections with one another, leaning on each other for change, and then figuring out what's next for me. How have I used my network? How do I want to continue to use that? And based on what I learned in this year, pretty expedited year, how to make change in my community.
If there's a rural leader that's listening, how would you let them know that they can plug in or nominate a rising leader? How do they get connected?
Yeah. So on our website, which I'll give you the link for, we have a general, if you're interested in RSLA, put your contact information here. If you want to nominate someone, put that contact information here. In March, we'll start doing our recruitment rollout. So what we'll do is we'll ask anyone who's participated in RSLA if they have names. I'll do a lot of outreach just different role networks of people. I feel like I email a lot and I say, here's this opportunity and any role leader can participate. But the other thing is, I think sometimes fear prevents us from pursuing an opportunity that's really maybe different than how we've approached our professional learning before. But I'm not looking, nor is our team looking for school leaders that are at the best rural schools in America, because best can be defined multiple different ways. But we're looking for rural school leaders who are in maybe a weird rut within their own leadership journey. They're really craving connection to other leaders, or they just really want to hone in and finally pour into their own development, and the permission for them to pour into their own development, knowing that by taking that action, it's a model for what everyone else in their building can and should be doing, I think is powerful. And just throw your hat in the ring. We're expanding the cohort. We're really focusing on just more community connection. And every role leader has a story to tell. And it's a gift, honestly, to be able to work with so many of them who, while I facilitate the program, they teach me kind of what needs to take place and change every year.
I love that. We're all learners all the time.
Yes. Yes, we are.
So, Casey, I always end with one question, and that is, what does the term rural advantage mean to you?
I think that term I'll answer in a personal way of when I think through my experience as a rural leader and having moved to a rural area, not being from a rural area, is that community will never be richer. You will have someone that you can count on for every single element of your life, whether it's getting into a last minute doctor's appointment, whether it's getting a mechanic to look at your car because it won't start and they're willing to come to your driveway to do it, whether it's a community or church organization that's willing to supply their buses so a school event can go past the normal hours. There is someone in that space that you are in that has the answers and the solution to really hard things. And you just have to find it by just asking them, what do you love about your community? And what do you bring to this community? And people know the answer. And sometimes it might be something silly, like there's a fork in the road in our community that's literally a fork in the road, which is a community in Kentucky that I just visited. But it's more than that. It's something that they can encourage people to come and see. They get to talk about the history of it, and they want to engage with you and they want to tell their story. So let them.
I love that answer. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you for spending some time with me today and really showing us what it takes to build a real leadership bench in rural places. And that, for making the RSLA feel practical and human and doable. Your clarity on how fellows learn and how to stay rooted in their communities, it's a gift that I think leaders can give themselves and their community at large. And I hope that we have listeners that are going to take advantage of the upcoming application cycle. So thanks for coming and sharing some information about what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun to talk about, but also thank you for the work you're doing and telling rural stories. And I think it was a podcast that you recently did with another Casey. There's a lot of solutions to these things that are just really hard. And we just have to give people the space to talk about what they're doing, which I feel like your podcast does. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think that, when we share together, we all grow together, and that's just to the benefit of our community. So that's why the Rural Scoop is around. So thanks for noting that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Well, thank you. And friends, if this conversation sparked an idea, Bring it to your next cabinet huddle or board briefing. Name a rising educator star in your district and see if you can sketch some supports that they're going to need this semester, including getting involved with the RSLA. If the Rural Scoop helped you with leading with purpose, please like this episode, subscribe to the show, and leave a comment with your takeaway. Those comments help other leaders find us, and I read every note. So I'm your host, Melissa Sadorf. And remember, in rural leadership, our strength is our shared story. When we lead together, we thrive together. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from Vela Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit velaconsultants.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education. And as always, keep leaning in to the rural advantage.